Welcome to Build Series. I'm Lauren Moraski from HuffPost. Can you believe Sex and the City debuted 20 years ago today? That's today. The HBO series, which followed the lives and adventures of 4 New York women, made a big mark on pop culture and still resonates 2 decades after its premiere, which is why I'm thrilled to introduce TV historian Jennifer Keishin Armstrong. She's the writer behind the new book, Sex and the City and Us, How 4 Women, single women actually, change the way we think, live, and love. Everyone, please welcome Jennifer to the Build stage.
Thank you.
I think, I skipped over the word single when I read that, but single was a big part of this show. The fact that these 4 women were single, they're in their 30s, and I think that's what made it different.
Absolutely, and it was actually, subtitles take a lot more work than you think, and it was a huge part of, I was really careful about wanting that in there, because what it really changed is our perception of the single woman kind of as a type in media.
Absolutely. Now, I love that you start the book off and you talk a little bit about how Sex and the City affected you, because it sort of changed your life at one point, right?
It did. Obviously, there were other factors at play, too. I don't just model my life on television shows alone, but I had moved to the New York City area, so Jersey, actually, across the way, right in the middle of the run in 2001. And I was going into the city for work at Entertainment Weekly magazine and kind of started to feel a little more like Carrie than I had before. You know, I hadn't realized it was kind of within my reach, essentially, when I had first started watching it. And the more I watched, and other things went on in my life, and I was spending more time in the city and really modeling my life on it, going to the places they went to, all of that stuff. I just sort of realized that I did not want to be engaged to my fiance anymore,
Wow.
who I had moved to the New Jersey area with, and I had been with him since college. So, I really felt like this was a thing suddenly that was within my reach, and I really wanted to experience before settling down.
Got it. So you changed course, and you didn't get engaged. You didn't marry him, I guess. And, life's different now, right? Because of it.
Absolutely.
I think we all have that episode or that part of the series that really resonates with us. Reading through the book, I remember where I was when I watched that episode. You could just, it takes you back. You did, in addition to just doing research, you talked to some people who were involved in the show, Sarah Jessica Parker, Darren Star. What was it like getting to talk to them, and what was it? Was it easy to get them on board?
It was it worked out okay. I'm so grateful is what I would say. And they are very, very generous people. I've written a couple of different books about television shows where I interviewed the people involved, and they've all been wonderful. But this one, I don't know, it just felt really special. It felt like they wanted to talk because they loved the show so much. That's what I would say is and they also kept telling me that they're like a family.
Huh.
And I felt like, when a family welcomes you in, for at least dinner, that was sort of what I felt like. And I felt really honored. And I think it's always a reciprocal relationship. It's like they trusted me with their story, essentially.
Well, you spend day in and day out on a set, out in the streets of New York, of course, and you probably get really close to people on, through those 7 years on the show. So
yeah, and especially the writers. It was an all-female writing staff. It was run by men. It was run by Michael Patrick King and created by Darren Star, but it was all women besides that, and that was pretty extraordinary. It's still kind of extraordinary, unfortunately, and it was definitely then. And they were sharing, those stories came from their own lives. So imagine all of the intimate details that they were sharing with each other. And they told me these great stories about how sometimes they'd have to act out the sex scenes together and make sure the mechanics would work, all kind of, on the sofa in the writer's room. So they got really close.
So female power on the set, at least in the writer's room.
Yeah.
Which is great to see.
Yeah. They felt like it was so important because the whole point is to tell the story of these single women, and these were all women in their 30s who lived in Manhattan, were currently dating, and really just would go out at night, date, come back in the morning, tell their stories, and put them into script.
Yeah, I always want to be at brunch with them every weekend. I wish I had that life, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
But we kind of do in New York. You definitely go through different phases in New York and have those day after brunch chats, which, Anyway, I digress. But that said, we forget that this was really started by Candace Bushnell, who was a writer in New York, and she wrote a column for the New York Observer, and it became a big hit. What was that column about, and why do you think it resonated so much with so many people?
Yeah, it was really important to me to tell her story too, because it feels weird. Like, I know she's famous, but I feel like her story itself has not been told in much detail. So I was very interested in, like, she's the real Carrie Bradshaw.
Yep.
You know? So it was a column called Sex in the City. It was a little darker. If you go back and read, you can read the book version, which is a compilation of those columns. It was a little sort of darker and more cynical, actually, than the show itself when it became a show. But people went crazy for it. They really didn't think people would, but it was just one of those things that really resonated with people. I think it was a combination of relating to it, but also kind of just a, like, insider view into people's dating lives and what was going on with people sexually and socially and otherwise in a certain kind of, like, stratospheric subset of New York City. And people were, like, one of my favorite things is people were reading it on the way to the Hamptons. People were exchanging it. People were faxing it to Los Angeles because it was a different time.
Yes.
So, like, it was a big deal. And that was why then, she first got offers to publish it as a book, which she did. And then very soon, like, kind of concurrently, people were already wanting to option it for either a movie or television. And there was kind of a race to get it.
And Darren Star, of course, the creator of Beverly Hills 90210 and Melrose Place, took it on. And what did he add to it that made it a hit?
The column itself was really a newspaper column. There were some fictional characters with sort of storylines, but it was a lot more broad. There was a Carrie character, but other than that, it was not like four central women the way the show is. And that was his big contribution mostly, was figuring out, like, okay, I'm going to have the Carrie character. Obviously, she's the columnist, but she has to have a group of close friends that we can stay with. And he pretty brilliantly, I think, decided on kind of that Golden Girls model of like the four women, all of them are quite different. So that what that enabled them to do is what I call kind of these Socratic dialogues about different sex things and relationship things. So they'll just kind of come to brunch and be like, what do you guys think of, bad kissers or whatever? And then they all have different ideas and discussions, and obviously they got a lot more graphic than bad kissers. I just figured I'd keep it safe for now in the middle of the day.
PG-13 before the evening, sure. But there was a part in the book where you talked about Sarah Jessica Parker having a very candid conversation about sex scenes, because of course the show's called Sex in the City. So before she came on board, she had a conversation with some of the producers about what she was comfortable with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They really wanted her. Darren said he wrote that script and heard it in her voice, and he felt really strongly that she should do it. So he was courting her hard for this, and she said, it's Sex in the City, and I've only seen one script. I don't know what you think is going to happen here, but I really, the main thing was she didn't want to be fully naked. She also wanted to make sure there wasn't like excessive swearing just because they were on HBO. And he kind of just said to her, and then followed up with the others, that, look, you do what you want to do. Like, if you're comfortable with something, let's do it. If you're not comfortable, let's not do it. So, like, she would keep her bra on for her sex scenes. And, she didn't do as many of the racy sex scenes. And kind of, of course, different characters need different things in terms of sex scenes as well. So she just, she got to do it the way that she wanted to. And the men really wanted the women to feel comfortable.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
In that case.
Yeah, absolutely.
The show also was very different the first 2 seasons, really. I mean, there were a lot of interstitials, like talking to people on the street, a little bit of on camera, Sarah Jessica Parker talking to the camera. You might forget that because the show did not end that way. Why do you think they made the pivot away from that?
So, I mean, like a lot of shows, it evolved. You try things out, you see what works. And honestly, in a lot of ways, it was about what was really working well that made them decide to ditch those other things. They kind of were gimmicky. Like you said, I mean, especially the talking to the camera. Yeah. Sarah Jessica said something really cute to me. She said, you don't understand how hard that is to do. And you have to be really talented. And really, the only person I've ever seen to do it well was my husband in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, that's like the quintessential talking to the camera. It's
quintessential talking to the camera one, and he's so charming. She's like, he pulled it off, but when I had to do it, I felt awkward. So that, and those weird, like, construction worker on the street talking about like how he feels about, I don't know, women who have sex like men or whatever, which is the first episode, like men, you know, unattached. So they ditched those mainly because they realized that they had enough with the characters and that they started to really want to follow the characters' journeys instead of taking up all this extra time with this nonsense that was really trying to mimic the column idea a little bit more. It weirdly even reminds me of like Seinfeld when they started out. First they would show him doing stand-up and then later they ditched it because they realized they had so much story to tell that they didn't want to spend the time anymore.
Right, and only 30 minutes to tell it. Right?
Exactly,
So.
exactly. These are, you know, this is a short show. So even though it's HBO, so it's a full 30 minutes, they still felt like, and think of those later seasons when there's a lot of drama going on.
Yep.
Of course, you want more time with that. They already had 4 women's stories to tell. Like, that's enough.
Yeah, yeah. And this is the type of show where I don't think that they thought it was going to be as big as of a hit as it was. There was a moment where George Clooney says to Kristen Davis, like, hey, I saw your show. It's great. And then at that moment, I think there was a realization like, oh, wait, we're a hit?
Yeah, I mean, once George Clooney is a fan,
yeah, then
like,
it's all over.
I feel like I would feel that way too. Yeah, that's a cute story that he knew Kristen Davis from being on ER together briefly, and he came up to her at a premiere and was like, congratulations on the show, and she was like, what show? What are you talking about? And he was like, Sex and the City. And she was like, oh my God, I didn't know this got to like George Clooney level already. So yeah, that was kind of one of those moments when they realized. And I'd say right around that, you know, end of the second season, that was when they really started to go like, oh, this is really big. And you never know when you go into a show.
Sure. I mean, look at we talked about Seinfeld.
Right.
Seinfeld, same thing. After the first season, it was, you know, it wasn't as big of a hit as it became later on.
Right. And especially with something like Sex and the City, we have to remember that it's really, really, really weird. But at that time, like HBO was not a thing. Like no one was watching, very few, you know, it just wasn't known as the powerhouse it is now. So everybody kept going like, what show are you on? Some sex show on HBO? Like it sounds kind of like, oh, like there used to be the show called Real Sex on HBO that was like a documentary about like nudist colonies and stuff. So everybody kept confusing the two. So like there was no sense that this was going to be big. Darren Star, in fact, specifically said he didn't want to do a big populist hit because he had done 90210 and Melrose. This was supposed to be his artsy, you know, indie artsy thing, which is hilarious in retrospect. But he really saw it more as his like artistic, you know, expression, not some big hit.
How that changed. At the same time, there were some misfires throughout the series. What can you say about those and some of the things that just really didn't sit well?
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, part of it is that it's lasted so long that we're still watching it. So we're watching it with like 2018 eyes. And there are things that we've come a long way on. Therefore, when we watch it, we're like, ugh. We know that they took a lot of criticism even during the show for their lack of diversity. Yep. I think that's a big thing. They're in New York City, you know, so that was particularly kind of egregious feeling. And it was just at that time when we kind of knew better, but no one knew what to do yet. So they just kind of, you know, first didn't really deal with it, then tried a few things. You know, there's an episode when Samantha dates a black man, and it just feels a little too much like the episode where Samantha dates a black man. You know, it's just a little too like on the nose and clumsy in that way. You know, Blair Underwood comes on later, but it's not till, you know, the middle of the last season to date Miranda. So they always kind of struggled. And to me, what I always say is that this speaks to the importance of diversity behind the scenes, because I think it would have been an easier transition for them if they had a diverse staff, essentially.
Sure.
So, you know, things like that we know better now about, and also even things like there's what I call the bisexual episode, where, you know, Carrie says bisexuality is a stop on the way to Gay Town or something like that. And there's a couple of episodes where Samantha is dealing with some transsexual hookers in her neighborhood and uses maybe words we wouldn't use now. So to me, what this shows is how far we've come on these issues in such a short time that now we look at it and we go like, no, that is not how we talk about that.
Sure.
But no, like very few of us knew any better at that time in terms of those sort of sexual spectrum issues, I think in particular.
Do you think if made up to date, it could thrive now, this show, if it launched today, for example?
I mean, I think it could. It would look different.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the other thing I say about those kinds of issues that they were struggling with is that when you're a show that's pushing boundaries, sometimes you're going to push in the wrong direction and go wrong, and that's the risk of it. But there's no reason that you, and you know, we do have shows that are about young women. They look different now. They look like, I mean, Girls was a big comparison point, but even things like Broad City, you know, totally different vision of being young and female in New York, right? Like not glamorous at all, but still dealing with, you know, they talk about sex a lot in explicit ways, and they're definitely about female friendship on that show. A show like Insecure,
right,
which is one of my absolute favorites. She's talked about how, like, she's aware of Sex and the City's influence before that, but what's cool is all of these shows are able to kind of take it further because they're, like, passing the baton and taking it further, you know, and doing things that Sex and the City just couldn't have done at the time.
Right, right. Well, one of the things about Sex and the City, which I can't believe I have not even mentioned yet, is the fashion.
Yeah.
And your shoes are awesome right now, and I understand there's a Sex and the City story behind them.
Actually, not that long ago, I was in Midtown to do some, like, promotional, you know, photos and stuff like that. I had, like, here was me with the Cosmo.
Yeah.
And I stumbled upon, I really didn't know it was there, there's like a pop-up store for SJP's shoes. She has a shoe line. And so I was like, well, I should see what that's about. So I went in there, and she was there.
Whoa.
Selling shoes, which is really weird. And so I said hi. I had interviewed her way back. So I said hi, and she helped me pick out these shoes.
I love it.
Yes, and she like put them on my feet. Like, you know, when you go to like a shoe salesperson and they like put them on your feet. It was just so weird that I was like, what's happening? Because I said, I do need shoes for book tour, you know, and she was like, here's why these are going to be great for you.
Amazing.
Like, she totally sold me on them. And that is why I have these shoes for book tour, which was just such a great experience. I was like, well, I got to buy them now, and I couldn't be like, no, thanks.
Yeah. No, they're in. Well,
I'm gonna keep looking.
They're great.
And they're obviously great. So they make me, they're like a little bit Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. You know, they're great.
So fun. Well, you know, I can't talk to you without talking about the drama recently with Sarah Jessica Parker and Kim Cattrall. It's very public. They've been talking back and forth to each other over the last year or so on social media. What do you make of all of that?
I mean, I talk a little bit about this. There's a long history of what I call the so-called feud, even if we kind of know there are real feelings behind it, just because I do think it's a combination of like a media creation and real feelings, if that makes sense. Like, imagine if you had a coworker who you were fine with, maybe not best friends with, fine with, you worked great together, didn't hang out afterwards, and then for 20 years, people kept coming up to you and being like, why aren't you best friends? Did you get her something for her birthday? Why didn't you get her something for her birthday? What's going on now? What's going on now? You would get a little annoyed. So I feel like I really looked back because I wanted to know where this started. And it started as early as like season 2, there were reports. And it was mainly because Kim Cattrall had such a breakout moment with her incredible character on that show. I mean, there's no one who's better suited. She's just incredible. And there were kind of like these rumors that Sarah Jessica Parker didn't like it because she's the star. And it's typical stuff. It's always, you know, and I do think there's a sexist element to this that, you know, as they said to me, like, no one was asking why Jim Gandolfini wasn't hanging out with like the other Sopranos off the set or whatever, or what he got them for their birthday, which is literally a question that these women faced sometimes. And I also think we want them to be friends because we relate so hard to the show. It's hard to separate, like, like you want these people to be real. We want to go to brunch with them and have them be friends. So it's just, there's something about this show that kind of does this to people, I think, more than others.
Absolutely. Do you think there'll ever be another Sex and the City film? Because obviously that stems back to this sort of quote-unquote feud.
Yeah, and this feud came up again when they were trying to negotiate the first movie because Kim Cattrall initially said no. And so I would cite that as like never say never because she said no to the first movie for a while and then finally said yes. So it could happen, though the recent blow up was pretty bad. So I don't know. And, you know, maybe sometimes I think we're in this age of reboots too.
Yes.
And I think we have learned, particularly in very recent weeks, the shortfalls of that approach. Like digging the stuff back up, you risk your show's like good memories and legacy and reputation if things go badly.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe it's better for us to just watch our reruns.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we definitely saw that last week with Roseanne. That is for sure.
Yeah.
And Kim Cattrall, didn't she say no to the show right off the bat anyway?
She did.
Right?
She did. It's interesting. She's always been resisting this thing the whole time. It's like she knew it was going to take over her life. She signed on at the very last minute, and they begged her because they had cast someone else and everything. And then they just kept going, no, it's got to be her. I know it's, and they were right? I mean, I think one of my favorite things in the book is that they call her the Lucille Ball of the bedroom, because she really, and that is an acting challenge, and she's talked about it, how like, you know, doing those sex scenes over and over again so much, it's like, how can I fall on the bed differently? How can I have an orgasm differently? Like all of these things. And if you watch some of those sex scenes, man, like she is just extraordinary. I don't know how she did it.
She's a real talent.
She's I mean, I think,
really,
you know, people like to sort of make fun of it or like, you know, not take it seriously, but my God, I mean, and there's also like a depth to Samantha. I mean, don't forget, she also went through breast cancer. Yeah. There were definitely moments for me that she made me cry too. And there's almost like an unspoken, I feel like there's a whole past that Samantha has that she kind of communicates, but never totally gives us. I don't know. I think she was extraordinary. So they were right, but I mean, maybe she was a little right too. You know, maybe she was feeling that like, oh my God, what if this takes over my life? And it did. It made her career in a lot of ways, but also then this is what she's known for, and that's what actors always struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. Prior to this, you did Seinfeld. You wrote about Seinfeld in a book. What was it like creating a book like that, and what did you uncover that you did not know prior to that book about Seinfeld?
About
maybe the people would want to know.
I mean, it's funny because there's a weird parallel, even though you wouldn't, like, they're so different, these shows, besides the New York part, but I always love talking to the writers the most, probably because I'm a writer. Yep. But they also always have the best stories. They're an untapped resource in a lot of ways. And so kind of with both of these in totally different ways, I think I was a little surprised to find out how much they really relied on real life, you know, and totally different kinds of plots. But like the Seinfeld guys would kind of like get to the point where they'd go out and try to make stuff happen to themselves. Ridiculous Seinfeldian things just to like, you know, when they were running out of stuff, it's like, okay, what if I go rent a car? What will happen? Or whatever, you know. So it's funny because both of these shows in totally different ways really had this fidelity to like, at least starting with something that really happened in real life. Both had that rule, and, you know, for very different reasons. On Seinfeld, they had to start with something that happened in real life, and then they could take it in their crazy direction, however they wanted. But, you know, even like the Soup Nazi episode, you know, the writer Spike Feresten told me, he said there was almost like a gritty documentary about that guy, because he's like, it was exactly the way this guy who we all know as the Soup Nazi now, you know, he really was like that. And so there's so much stuff like that, and it's all these New York stories. So in both shows, it's like super real New York stories, but totally different kinds.
I love it. All right. Well, we have some questions from the audience right now, so let's get to it.
Hello.
Hi.
You were speaking a little bit about looking at Sex and the City through a 2018 lens. So I wanted to know specifically, how do you think each of the females' lives would have been different if the show had been in 2018?
If they were, you mean if they were kind of the same age, like they were still in their 30s?
The same age.
Yeah. I mean, clearly Carrie would have to be like, you know, probably a blogger or something instead, right? I mean, who's reading a newspaper column anymore? And I can definitely see like Samantha. I've actually thought a lot about her. I can see her being kind of like a social media expert specifically. Can't you just imagine her being very good at that? Like, oh, honey, you have to put that on Instagram and you have to do it this way. I think Miranda could still kind of be the same. I mean, running for governor, obviously. But other than that, I can see, you know, she's a very modern character to me. And a lot of the younger women who are like catching onto the show now have said that they identify most with Miranda, which is great. She's kind of the feminist, successful one, and that's who we all want to be now. And, you know, Charlotte's an interesting one, right? Because I mean, maybe there are still women sort of like that, but she would definitely be like a throwback to another time, being kind of that romantic, but also the one who really wants to just get married to a more powerful man. I mean, I'm sure there are women like that out there, but you know, it would be interesting. It would be interesting to see how all of that would work out for them.
Great question.
Yes.
All right, who's next?
Hi. So after tackling Sex in the City, is there like any other TV shows you want to maybe dig into, like as another topic?
Possibly. We're still working on that. It's actually very. We were talking about this before the show, and it's very difficult, and it's getting harder because, first of all, I've written things about, you know, I've gone through a couple shows now, and also other people are writing books about shows too. So, you know, you have to have enough distance. It has to be one we're still talking about 20 years later, even if it isn't all perfect 20 years later. You know, it has to be something people want to read, and it has to be something I can write 350 pages or so about, 300 pages or so about it. So it's a struggle, and I'm working on it now, but I'm not sure yet. Thank you.
All right, we'll have to have you back when
Yes.
when that comes out.
I mean, there's going to be something. There has to be something.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming by today, Jennifer. The book is out now. It's called Sex and the City and Us. You can get it online. You get it at your bookstore. Give it up one more time for Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me.